Good afternoon. My name is Ned Lazaro, and I'm the Associate Curator of Costume and Textiles at the Wadsworth in Hartford, Connecticut. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to Artful Conversations, a monthly virtual program offered to museum members and organized by our development department. The brains and skill behind today's event include my colleague Diana Reeve, as well as our AV wizard, Eric Bowen. Our speaker today, Brenda Danilowitz, centers her talk around the Wadsworth 1957 pictorial weaving by Anni Albers titled In Orbit. This piece is currently on loan to the show Anni Albers Constructing Textiles on view at the Zentrum Paul Klee Center in Bern, Switzerland. We'll hear from Danilowitz about the exhibition, Albers's artistic trajectory, and her technical mastery of the loom. I'm sure you'll all have plenty of questions, so be sure to put them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the allotted time. Brenda Danilowitz is the Chief Curator of the Josef and Anni Albers Foundation in Bethany, Connecticut, a position she has held since 2000. Brenda holds a master's degree in art history from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, and holds undergraduate degrees in physiology, physiological chemistry, and English literature. She has curated, lectured, and published extensively on the Albers' collective works and artistic legacies across the globe, making her one of the leading experts on the couple and their artistic production. And of course, most recently, she co-curated the show currently on view at the Zentrum Paul Klee. That show is on view until February 22nd, I believe, of this month. So do take that trip to Switzerland now that you've been thinking about. And Brenda is also an editor and contributor to the accompanying publication of the show. So please join me in welcoming Brenda Danilowitz.
Thank you, Ned. So wonderful to be here. And thank you for this great introduction. And also to the Wadsworth itself for its very generous loan to our exhibition. I'll be showing you some images of that. I'm delighted today to talk about the work of Anni Albers, one of the best known and admired hand weavers and textile designers of the 20th century, and in case you didn't know it, a resident of Connecticut for almost half her life. So my talk today, as Ned said, will focus on a work in the collection of the Wadsworth titled In Orbit, which the museum has loaned to our exhibition. Our goal as curators of the exhibition, and my co-curator and partner in this is Fabienne Egelhofer, who is the chief curator of the Paul Klee Center in Bern. Our goal as curators was to present Albers's work in an expanded way that underlines and illuminates her achievements as an experimental and innovative textile designer whose sophisticated engagement with materials encompassed collaborations with architects and other fabricators. Drawing on her accomplishments as a writer and thinker, the exhibition's title is inspired by her 1946 essay titled Constructing Textiles. So here are some views of the exhibition, and you see the title up there, Constructing Textiles. And the museum, the Paul Klee Center, has this amazing, huge open space, and that was fundamental in the way that we designed the exhibition so that you could see one part of the exhibition from any other part. And I'll show you a couple of views of this. And then, yeah. So in her art, Anni Albers pursued the goals of understanding weaving as a construction with threads, as a constantly evolving experiment with new materials, and as an integral part of architecture. She regarded her work as an adventure and argued in her writing for designers to embrace, quote, the power of creation. In 1963, when the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica invited Albers to define hand weaving, this is what she wrote. I think you could read it yourself, but I'll read out the second part here. Weaving hand. This was in the Encyclopedia Britannica. One of the most ancient crafts, hand weaving is a method of forming a pliable plane of threads by interlacing them rectangularly. Invented in a pre-ceramic age, it has remained essentially unchanged to this day. Even the final mechanization of the craft through the introduction of power machinery has not changed the basic principle of weaving. In weaving, one system of threads, the warp, crosses another, the weft, at right angles, and the manner of intersecting forms the different weaves. So here we have an image of this from one of her textile samples, and you can see here the black lines are the warp, the vertical part of the weaving, and the lightish brown and gold lines are the weft, the horizontal part that goes in between the warp. So the warp is fixed, and the weft, and this is quite important, the weft can be altered by the weaver, but the warp stays in place. That's the structure of the weave. Before going further, let's take a close look at the Wadsworth weaving, and this is in orbit. And I thought it would be lovely to show you some images I made last week when I was in Bern of the real great interest that the audience was taking in all of the work, but particularly I think that in orbit seemed to them to be something that they really, I mean, they stood and really looked at and studied and thought about how it was made. So we see it here in the background, people constantly coming up to it, and then this couple who probably stood there for a full 5 minutes while I photographed them. One of the remarkable qualities of In Orbit is that although weaving, with the limitations of its strict adherence to the vertical horizontal of warp and weft, provided a kind of railing to Anni Albers, who observed that through this restriction, this warp and weft restriction, it was a tremendous help to me, as I think it probably can be to anybody, she wrote, but it came with a caveat, as long as you at the same time are concerned with breaking through it. So the warp's there, but the weaver should think of ways to make it more interesting and interrupt it. So this is exactly what she did by subverting the grid through her bold use of techniques, materials, and color in these weavings, works that she intended to be seen as non-functional works of art. And In Orbit is just a wonderful example of this. So let's take a closer look. So what I've done here is taken out the middle section of the weaving so that you can see in detail how the warp is made. This is the top edge and this is the bottom edge. And what you'll notice here, first of all, there is her signature in blue at the bottom left. And we can see that in this segment at the top, the brown and the white form the warp. In the middle section, it shifts to blue and yellow, and then on the white, at the end section, it goes back to brown and white. And here at the bottom edge, we have a different and opposite direction. So the blue and yellow is there, the white's here, and the blue and yellow there on the other side. This is achieved because what this is what we call a double weave. So there are two sets of warps, and the weaver can decide which ones to bring to the front, which ones to leave at the back, and this creates the pattern of the work as a whole. So when we go back to looking at this, you'll see there the differences in the bottom and the top, and how through the whole fabric of the weave, either gold or yellow or blue or white or brown show through. This is brown. It probably was originally a much blacker color because textiles, wool specifically has an ability to fade over time, and this is an over 50, over 60 years old, this piece, almost 70 years old. So here we see the overall pattern, which we see is composed of a grid made up of variations of these colors, depending on how the weaver orientates them. And what's amazing about this is, and we'll look at some closer up images in a minute, is how many different combinations and twists and patterns that she creates within each of these rectangular areas. And we could probably diagram them if we had enough time, but it's a very intricate pattern, as you'll begin to see the more you look at it. So here we have this in the overall checkerboard pattern. Okay, we notice, and you probably could see this, that in fact the overall grid is interrupted by three forms. At the top, a kind of cross form where the yellow predominates. Lower down here, a more brown form where the brown and white, where the brown and the yellow kind of interweave. And then up here, a kind of a white form. And these are the forms that were in orbit in the title. So these two elliptical forms float sort of randomly across the surface, and then this yellow cross form is up here. And this is a wonderful kind of demonstration of how she manages to break the grid, to actually take this vertical horizontal rule and out of it form areas that are elliptical, not quite circular, but elliptical, or in a cross form. To understand how she does this, we could look at these in detail. So here, this is the yellow part at the top. The yellow and blue threads break through the dominant brown and white threads of the warp and create an illusion. So here I can outline it with the pointer. Create an illusion that suddenly makes a cross appear within this overall grid. When we move to the next area, which is the brown circle or ellipse, she mutes or disguises the white threads. They're sort of hidden at the back because she's bringing the darker threads forward. And so, and then in the corners, the white threads remain and in fact are a little bit exaggerated. So out of this vertical horizontal, she creates this circular form. And then here, the white form, the white floating form in orbit, she brings the yellow, blue, and white warps forward, pushes the brown warps and to the back, and creates this other lighter image. So it's an intriguing demonstration of how Albers both maintains the vertical horizontal structure of the warp and weft and simultaneously breaks through it by this kind of manipulation that, without changing the structure at all of the overall weave, manipulates light and dark threads to create an optical illusion of bodies floating in space. In a 1964 interview, Annie, when asked to describe in orbit, she referred to the 1957 launch into space of the Russian satellite Sputnik and said simply, with characteristic modesty, "I have to apologize for the title. When I made this, there was nothing in orbit, and I thought of it in these terms as sun and moon, and in the top left corner, you see a kind of a starlight thing." And I called it In Orbit. And to my surprise and shock, a little later, that word became very popular, with Sputnik going up. I would never have dared give it that title. So she modestly, somehow coincidentally intuited this event in space in 1957. So now a little bit of biography and history of Anni Albers. Born in Berlin in 1899, Anni Albers grew up in an affluent and sophisticated family, but wealth did not impress her. In 1922, 2 years after it opened, she enrolled at the recently founded progressive German art and architecture school, the Bauhaus, where she entered the weaving workshop and where she met and in 1925 married the artist and educator Josef Albers. And here we see some of her Bauhaus works. Of these meticulously executed works, and these are drawings or gouache painted plans for the textiles that she would make at the Bauhaus. In our catalog, Glenn Adamson, recognizing the structural compositions of these works, writes, the wall hangings do not so much subdue themselves to architecture as depict it, reproducing its rhythms with contrapuntal passages suggestive of window shutters, tiled walls, or shadows falling across the floor. And he thus makes this connection between her weavings and the structures of her weavings and architecture. And this is really a theme of we see in her writings as well. So soon after the Nazi government came into power in Germany in 1933, it shut down the Bauhaus. Uncertain of their futures in Germany, that same year, Anni and Josef Albers accepted a fortuitous invitation to teach at Black Mountain College, a newly formed and progressive college near Asheville, North Carolina. The college's program was shaped by John Dewey's concept of learning by doing. Its founder, John Andrew Rice, embraced the idea that art should be at the center of education and welcomed the Bauhaus's student-focused methods of instruction. To this experiment in American education, Anni Albers brought her belief in modernist abstraction's power to form art. And here we see her students. It gives you a really great, this photograph's been reproduced over and over, but it gives you a great idea of first of all, the informality of Black Mountain College. This is in 1945. The outdoorsness, the barefooted students, the absolute, freedom of education, really. And then we see her students, her weaving students, doing work on their own looms, which they have made themselves. And these are backstrap looms, which she had learned about on trips to Mexico and brought back to the college. So on extensive travels to Latin America, first and most frequently to Mexico and later to Chile and Peru, Anni Albers developed her understanding of ancient Mesoamerican and especially Andean art, claiming that these beginnings, these early works of weaving, implied, and these are her words again, exploration, selection, development, and a potent vitality not circumscribed by the tried and traditional. This visual sophistication of ancient objects demanded a new assessment of her ideas about weaving and had a profound effect on her work after that. Oops. Okay. After leaving Black Mountain College in May 1949 and moving to New Haven, Connecticut, where Josef Albers had been appointed to head a new Department of Design at Yale University in 1950, Anni Albers continued to teach a small number of private students. At the same time, her work was increasingly in demand from architects. As we see in this example, in 1950, Walter Gropius, who had been the founder of the Bauhaus, but by that time had become the head of the Harvard Architecture Department, asked Anni Albers to create materials having a masculine character for his new graduate dormitories at Harvard University. Ever responsive to the specific demands of the commission, she created low-maintenance bedspreads of plaid design to enliven the space and conceal the students' dirty shoes and cigarette butts. And here we see a photograph of the interior of one of these dormitories and an example of the bedspreads that she created. She actually made 3 different color forms of them. This is the black and red one, and there was an orangey red one and a green one. And so there would be some variety in these dormitories. To separate the sleeping areas, as we see in this photograph, there was a rail with a curtain which could be drawn across for privacy. And she conceived there a durable fabric of heavy black cotton and natural coarse bast fibers. The fabric's weight ensured that it hung in a flat vertical plane, creating an almost solid wall between the 2 parts of the dormitory and supporting and confirming her notion that fabrics should become part of architecture, that they played a valuable role in architecture, and that they needed to be recognized by such as architects, which is exactly what Gropius did in this case. In 1957, the same year that she made In Orbit, she received a commission from Georgi Kepes, who was then teaching, a designer who was teaching at MIT. And this is again another view from our exhibition of the example of this weaving that I'm going to be talking about now. And I just want to point out that this was how in the exhibition we determined to compile and compare and introduce the relationships between textiles, as we see it here, and the architecture of the whole thing. So for Kepes, who was overseeing the interior designer of a large synagogue in Dallas, Texas, and this is a photograph from the time of that, the interior of the synagogue. She created a covering for the Torah arks that were kept in the sacred art in the synagogue. We notice that these windows down here are, which were designed by Kepes, are repeated in the textile that she created. And this is one panel from this 8-panel work. So this, as you can see, has a soaring 17-foot high opening up here, and she created this ingenious composition whereby by taking 8 panels, repeating panels, all identical, and staggering them and inverting them, she could create a work of great sparkle and shining fabric to compete with this grandeur of the synagogue, and yet make a statement that is completely harmonious with the windows, with the whole, with the architecture of the space. So she designed 8 sliding panels, each covered with lengths of this machine-woven fabric in blocks of gold, green, blue, and silver lurex thread. This ingenious modular structure created a dynamic composition while the colors echoed the tones of Kepes's stained glass. So it's so fascinating to see that she was equally at home in her designs with the domestic scale of the Harvard bedroom project or dormitory project and the grand ceremonial scale of the Dallas Temple. In her own work, Albers, as with In Orbit, was beginning to focus on smaller, freer, and highly experimental individual weavings, taking her cues from her materials. A thread comes my way which I enjoy, she observed. There is a certain stimulation from material. A thread is suggestive to somebody attuned to weaving. She explained to the interviewer how, intrigued by a sudden movement of the thread, the surface, or perhaps the color of a yarn, or, quote, qualities like fuzziness or luster that are specifically textile, she might be drawn to the loom to create a work. Something of your own, she said, flows into it, a kind of subtlety of choice. The result was that in the 1950s and 60s, Albers created some of her most highly varied, innovative, and unique works. Oops. Okay, back there. In this, and here I show you 4 examples of these works, all created around this period, and In Orbit, of course, falls into this group. So we see clockwise from the left intersecting, and these are sections. These are not the complete works. Here we have the whole work, but this is a section of a work called South of the Border, with obviously reference to her travels in Mexico in terms of its color. The brightly colored Sunny, where patches of bright blue knots are seen against a shiny yellow and orange background to convey a joyful message of nature. And then finally, this work, which is called Underway, showing how she used floating wefts to create pathways and ways through the weaving. So I think what's remarkable about these works and about In Orbit is how the variety of color, of design, of technique, and of scale that she introduced into these works. This work, South of the Border, is really about 4 inches by 12 inches. That's it, tiny, but very commanding. Such forays into the expressive potential of wandering lines and knots are an invitation to her audience to read the textiles, intended to be viewed and contemplated as individual works of art. Weavings like these, that she described as pictorial weavings, were, in her words, not to be sat on, walked on, only to be looked at. I tried to get my beliefs, feelings, and ideas into other areas, which is in the direction of art. Other areas, that is, as compared with actual design and the production of textiles like tablecloths, curtains, clothing, what she called useful textiles. Intended to be viewed and contemplated as individual works of art, I've said that already. Okay. I try to get my beliefs and feelings and ideas into other areas, which is in the direction of art. Here, I'm concerned with form, line, color, proportions, and surface per se. A group of these works was exhibited at MIT in 1959 in an exhibition that traveled to museums in Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Houston, and also to the Yale University Art Gallery. For Anni Albers, here we see an exhibition, a black and white view of that exhibition, and Anni Albers, and this is a larger textile that's in the Courier Museum in New Hampshire. This is in orbit, placed strategically and beautifully, so we can see it's floating elements, and two of her other works. This one is Tikal, and this one is a work called La Luz, also from 1957. So to conclude, for Anni Albers, materials were the key to the creative process. And design involved an exchange between materials and the designer, whom she challenged to circumvent the no of the materials with the yes of an inventive solution. Her care in choosing both her materials and her words shaped her search for clarity, simplicity, and escape from clutter. Her bold experiments as an artist, designer, weaver, producer of textiles, printmaker, writer, and teacher, and her collaborations with architects to construct textiles for interior spaces reveal Albers's understanding of the power of creativity, craftsmanship, and careful consideration. Seeing Albers's work whole, connections between works separated in time, place, structure, materials, and technique appear in ways that echo her belief that art is something that makes you breathe in a different kind of way. Thank you. We can now take some questions. I hope you have some.
Thanks so much, Brenda. That was a feast for the eyes for sure, and your perspectives are just terrific. As we're getting queuing up some questions, I'll start with a question if you don't mind. Um, were there any new perspectives you had on Albers's work at the show in Bern? You know, seeing all them together, maybe something that hadn't struck you before, or
Well, I think it really confirmed and showed how uh, she could, her invention, she was so inventive and yet she was so consistent. So but with each new piece that she took up and each new project that she took up, she found a way to make it not only new, but appropriate to what the purpose was of the work. And this we could see over and over in the exhibition, and it was so gratifying to be able to show so much of her work at one time. So yeah, it was just fabulous, and the audience, I must say, were incredibly uh, curious and responsive to the work. And so I was there now for 5 days last week, and every day the galleries were full of people looking and spending time.
wonderful,
So it was most
wonderful.
gratifying. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific. We have a question from David. David notes that Anni Albers was also a printmaker. What did she say about the interaction between her work in the two different media?
Well, she said about printmaking when she discovered it. She first started making prints when she went with Josef Albers to the Tamarind print workshop in LA, invited by June Wayne, who had started Tamarind. And it was actually a lithography workshop. So that was the medium that she worked in. And she enjoyed immediately what she described as the freedom of printmaking because as I tried to show, weaving is very constricted unless you make this concerted effort to break out of it. But with printmaking, she could use different materials, new materials, and create in a much freer way. So she really enjoyed that, I think, and just in exploring a method of making art that was faster, uh, quicker, less arduous. I mean, weaving is a very definitely slow process. And in fact, to have created what she did in her lifetime is quite remarkable. Although I must make it clear that with her textiles, like the bedspreads and the curtaining and the actual useful textiles, if she called them that, or utilitarian works, many of them were manufactured in small weaving workshops. She did not make every single thing by hand herself. But she enjoyed the hand and she enjoyed printing and she enjoyed the different papers. And so it was a different kind of work. And it was definitely a almost like a second life for her. She only began it when she was in her 60s and continued for the rest of her life. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting, and
A
we're
great
glad she
question.
did.
Yeah.
We have a question from Bree. How did Josef Albers's work with color influence Annie's? And then how did her weaving influence
Uh,
his artwork?
okay, well, I'll start with the second part because, um, and this is a question that often gets asked, and they didn't try to separate their practices, although they did have a joint show at the Wadsworth in 1954, I think. Yeah, sometime then. So he was clearly, I think, influenced by the weaving that she was doing at the Bauhaus because at that time he wasn't really working with color. Joseph's work with color really took off when he came to the United States in 1933 and started teaching and started painting himself because at the Bauhaus his area was design, and the works that he made there were in glass, as some people might know. They also were very geometrical, which I think echoed in a way that her plans, her drawings from the Bauhaus. I think that, people often put them side by side and feel that these two people were working in a similar way. And I mean, there's no question that they probably were in some form, but she came to color through weaving much earlier than he came to color in painting. And of course, their approaches to color was very different. So, but they didn't really like to separate the way their work was looked at and didn't encourage it being shown together.
Interesting. That's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Um, let's see. Got a couple questions rolling in. This is sort of a general question. There have been so many exhibitions from Sherry. There have been so many exhibitions recently featuring modern and contemporary weaving. Do you have any thoughts about Anni Albers' position? Is she responsible for this popularity that we're currently seeing, or is she just one part of it?
Well, I wouldn't say she was responsible. That's a big charge to lay on her. But she did not really like the sort of sculptural weavings that started to be done in the 60s and 70s. These freestanding weavings. She felt, she was kind of a truth to materials kind of person. So she didn't really approve of those, but I think that she would have understood and enjoyed all of or most of the new weavings that are being made. And certainly she had a role in promoting this, unconscious role in promoting this, because all of these today's textile artists go to Anni Albers. And of course, her book on weaving, which was published in 1965, after she was, or just at the time that she was making her final woven works, was enormously influential. And of course, it's still in print today and is still read by most of the contemporary weavers. So she had an enormous impact. What she would have thought of it, I think, like anyone else, she would have liked some things and approved of some things and not of others. But she definitely would have, I think, enjoyed the widespread acknowledgement that weaving was getting as art, because I think that was one of the things that stood in her way, or she felt stood in her way. And that was why she made these pictorial weavings to actually say, this is a picture, this is something to be looked at. You need to look at it, go and examine how is it made. And so that was really, in terms of proselytizing for weaving, that she felt she had played a role, and I think she would be very thrilled to see how it's, burst out into public spaces and into art spaces in the last couple of decades.
Let's see, another question. It sort of gets to the ancient weaving traditions of other cultures that influenced Anni Albers's work. Um, was there a connection between Albers's work and Navajo weaving traditions?
She certainly was very aware of Navajo weaving. Because they were on their travels, they traveled through New Mexico, to Mexico, and we have photographs. Josef, of course, was a great photographer. We do have photographs of Navajo weavings. I don't think she ever she obviously enjoyed their patterns and their colors as any weaver would, and she was very aware of them and saw this as a tradition that was, important to her. And they loved the Southwest and they loved New Mexico, and I think it had a profound influence on their use of color and all aspects of their art.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one last question. Let's see. Um, besides the synagogue work that you showed us, did Albers do any other large scale works like that?
Oh yeah, many, many. She did she did other designs for synagogue. She did a huge piece for the uh, synagogue in Woonsocket, Rhode Island,
That's right.
which was in the exhibition, um, for a synagogue that no longer exists, I think, in New York. And she did about, I think, five synagogue commissions, but she also did commissions for stores. She did what she called a storefront sort of background material right back in the 30s. So yeah, she took commissions from architects and enjoyed them. She actually was commissioned by Louis Kahn to do a work that was never realized. So that was a huge work in his church that he did upstate in New York. So she was very well
Wow.
known by architects, and she also did fabrics for a house designed by Breuer, Marcel Breuer, and Gropius. So she was, yeah, very much involved in that.
Great, great. Um, and okay, our last question, I lied. Did the Albers have any children? And if so, did they explore the arts?
No, they did not. They did not have family, and they worked together day in and day out and side by side, but separately. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, audience, for all your questions. That concludes our artful conversation for February. Thanks again to Brenda and also to my colleagues, Diana and Eric. And thank you all for joining us today and being a valued member of the Wadsworth. Your support means the world to us. Please join us again on Tuesday, April 7th at noon via Zoom for our next Artful Conversation featuring art historian Rachel Spiegel-Gerstein, who will delve into the Wadsworth's fascinating painting by Peter Bloom titled The Italian Straw Hat. Thank you again. Thank you again, Brenda, and have a good day.
Thank you.